My best friend accused me of kidnapping after I saved her daughter from a sewer slide attempt that she ignored. I got a criminal record fighting for that girl. 2 years later, she called crying that her daughter won't speak to her. Growing up, my best friend Geraldine had always dreamed of being a mother. Ever since we were teenagers, she'd constantly talk about what kind of mom she'd be and how many kids she'd have. So when Stacy was born, Geraldine was over the moon, and I was just as happy. I'd never seen her glow so bright. Our daughters, Stacy and my Amy, grew up together like sisters, spending weekends and holidays at each other's houses. Fast forward 15 years. Geraldine asked if I could watch Stacy for a week while she took a solo vacation to Bali. It wasn't unusual. Geraldine liked her breaks, and Stacy practically lived at my house anyway. The first 2 days were fine, typical teen stuff, Netflix marathons, junk food, all of that. But on day 3, things took a turn. At dinner, I called Stacy down from her room, but she didn't answer. Amy said she hadn't seen Stacy since lunch, and a weird feeling settled in my stomach. I walked upstairs, knocked on her door, but got nothing. I tried opening the door, but it was locked. Stacy never locked her door. Something was off. I grabbed the key from the hallway drawer and opened the door, my heart pounding. Stacy was lying on her bed, barely breathing, surrounded by empty med bottles and a folded note. My vision blurred as I dialed 911. Amy stood frozen behind me, crying, asking what was happening, but I couldn't find the words. Everything happened fast. The ambulance arrived, and I was answering questions from EMTs while frantically texting a neighbor to watch Amy. On the ambulance ride, I called Geraldine. She was still at the resort. Through choking sobs, I told her what happened. But instead of sounding even remotely worried, Geraldine hesitated, then said, "Is it really that serious? Maybe she just wanted attention." I felt my stomach drop. My head spun in disbelief. At the hospital, the doctor explained Stacy needed her stomach pumped. I texted Geraldine immediately. Surely now she'd realize how serious it was. But Geraldine's next message knocked the wind out of me. "Changing flights is $200. It's expensive. Plus, you don't have to go to the hospital every day. That's literally what nurses are for." I stared at my phone, my blood boiling. I wanted to scream, but I knew Stacy needed me more than Geraldine's drama right now. I took off work, used my vacation days, and spent 3 straight nights in the hospital chair beside Stacy's bed. One night, she told me she thought Geraldine didn't love her anymore. She asked why her mom wasn't coming back for her. I didn't know how to respond. I just hugged her, feeling a wave of anger in my chest. Throughout all this, I sent Geraldine constant updates, photos, and texts. But each response I got back was shorter, colder. Meanwhile, she posted beach selfies, captioning, "Living my best life." It hit me then that the Geraldine I knew, the devoted mom she always claimed to be, had completely vanished. When Stacy was discharged, I prepared a safe, comforting room for her at my place. I tried countless times to talk to Geraldine about the situation, but she brushed it off every time. Geraldine finally showed up at my house, a full day after landing, deeply tanned and relaxed. She gave Stacy an awkward half hug, then immediately asked about the luggage she'd left before vacation. As I explained Stacy's recovery plan, Geraldine's eyes darkened, her jaw tightening with every word. Suddenly, Geraldine snapped. She stood up, accusing me of parenting her child behind her back. Her voice got louder, and she started shouting about me overstepping boundaries and blowing things out of proportion. "It was probably just for attention," she spat. That's when I heard a choked sob from the hallway. Stacy stood frozen, tears streaming down her cheeks. Geraldine barely glanced at her daughter. My heart pounded. "Are you kidding me?" I shouted. I yelled at Geraldine that she chose the beach over her dying daughter, but Geraldine just scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Teens are dramatic. You should have known better." That was it. I snapped and unloaded everything. I told her she was selfish, that she'd consistently put herself first, that Stacy's life was apparently only worth $200 to her. Geraldine's voice lowered, venomous and cold. "You don't understand what it's like needing a break from your kids." At that exact moment, something between us shattered completely. I saw who Geraldine really was, and I knew instantly our friendship was beyond repair. Geraldine grabbed Stacy's bag and demanded she leave, but Stacy locked herself in my bathroom, sobbing uncontrollably, refusing to go. And that's when Geraldine lost it. She began yelling, accusing me of kidnapping her daughter, and before I knew it, her phone was out, and she was calling the police. The sirens grew louder as I watched Geraldine pace my front lawn, phone pressed to her ear, gesturing wildly. Through the window, I could see Amy trying to coax Stacy out of the bathroom while Stacy's sobs echoed through the house. My hands shook as I gathered the hospital discharge papers, knowing I'd need them when the police arrived. 2 patrol cars pulled up, and Officer Rodriguez stepped out first, his expression neutral as he approached Geraldine. She immediately launched into her accusations, pointing at my house and raising her voice about kidnapping and conspiracy. I took a deep breath and walked outside, the discharge papers clutched in my hand. Officer Rodriguez separated us, positioning himself between Geraldine and me while his partner went to speak with her. I showed him the hospital documents, explaining that I was listed as Stacy's emergency contact and had been caring for her during her mother's vacation. Geraldine's story shifted every few minutes. First I'd kidnapped her daughter, then I'd brainwashed her, then I'd been planning this for months. Amy appeared in the doorway, defending me to the officers and explaining how often Stacy stayed with us. This triggered Geraldine to spin around, accusing both of us of conspiring against her. Her eyes were wild as she suggested I'd orchestrated the entire sewer slide attempt to steal her daughter. Officer Rodriguez's eyebrows raised at that claim. From inside the house, Stacy's muffled voice carried through the bathroom door, begging not to go with her mother. The officer's expression shifted, and he glanced between the house and Geraldine. I wrestled with whether to show him the text messages from Geraldine during Stacy's hospitalization, the ones dismissing the sewer slide attempt and complaining about flight change fees. I pulled out my phone and showed Officer Rodriguez the messages. Geraldine immediately claimed her phone had been hacked, that I must have sent those texts myself while she was sleeping in Bali. The accusation was so absurd that even the officer looked skeptical. A second police unit arrived, and Stacy still refused to leave the bathroom. Geraldine demanded they break down the door to retrieve her daughter. The officers insisted on speaking with Stacy privately first, but Geraldine's refusal made them visibly suspicious. When she grabbed Officer Rodriguez's arm to prevent him from going inside, he firmly removed her hand and warned her about interfering. Through the door, we could all hear Stacy telling the officers that her mother hadn't asked once if she was okay. She'd only demanded that Stacy leave immediately. The pain in her voice was heartbreaking. Geraldine's carefully maintained composure began to crack. Unable to contain herself, Geraldine shouted at Stacy through the door, calling her dramatic and attention-seeking in front of all the officers. The police exchanged meaningful looks. One of them found Stacy's sewer slide note in my folder of hospital documents, and Geraldine immediately claimed it was forged, that I'd written it to frame her. Officer Rodriguez explained that Child Protective Services would need to be notified given the circumstances: a minor's recent sewer slide attempt, the mother's dismissive response, and the current conflict. Geraldine's demeanor shifted instantly to performative concern, suddenly asking about Stacy's well-being and claiming she'd been desperately worried. 3 hours later, CPS worker Ellen arrived. Geraldine had transformed into the picture of a grieving mother, dabbing at dry eyes and speaking in a soft, wounded voice. I struggled to stay calm as she spun tale after tale. She mentioned my history of depression from my divorce 5 years ago, twisting confidences I'd shared as a friend into weapons against me. Stacy finally emerged from the bathroom, her face puffy and red. She wouldn't wouldn't make eye contact with anyone, especially her mother. When Geraldine attempted to hug her for show, Stacy physically recoiled and whispered for her not to touch her. Ellen made careful notes. Ellen observed that according to the hospital paperwork, Stacy should still be under psychiatric observation. The discharge had been AMA, against medical advice, because I wasn't her legal guardian and couldn't make her stay. Geraldine seized on this, claiming I'd endangered her daughter by removing her from proper medical care. I overstepped then, suggesting Stacy could stay with us just for tonight until everyone calmed down. It was the wrong thing to say. Geraldine's eyes lit up with vindication as she accused me of trying to steal her daughter, claiming I'd always wanted 2 daughters and was using Stacy's crisis to fulfill that wish. Ellen asked both of us to step back while she interviewed Stacy alone in Amy's room. Geraldine hovered by the door, trying to listen. Through the thin walls, we could hear Stacy's quiet voice explaining how often she stayed with us when her mom needed space, sometimes for days at a time without warning. Ellen discovered that despite our week-long arrangement for Stacy's care during the Bali trip, Geraldine had never officially added me as an authorized guardian. Amy, trying to help, mentioned specific instances when Stacy had stayed with us. During Geraldine's weekend trips, her dating adventures, her mental health breaks. I produced printed emails showing Geraldine had asked me to watch Stacy, but Geraldine claimed I'd coerced her, that she'd felt pressured because I was always trying to insert myself into their lives. Then she pivoted again. I must have given Stacy the pills, planted them to create this whole situation. Ellen made her decision. Stacy would go home with Geraldine tonight, but CPS would open a case for follow-up. The look of terror on Stacy's face as she gathered her things will haunt me forever. Amy hugged her goodbye, both girls crying. As they left, Geraldine's mask of concern dropped, and she yanked Stacy toward the car with unnecessary force. That night, neither Amy nor I could eat dinner. We sat in silence, both processing what had happened. I knew this wasn't over. Geraldine's accusations, the CPS case, Stacy's obvious fear of her mother. I started documenting everything I could remember, knowing I might need it. But I had no idea how much worse things would get, or how Geraldine would weaponize every act of kindness I'd ever shown her daughter against me. The morning brought a barrage of text messages from mutual friends. My phone buzzed constantly as I made breakfast, each notification bringing another concerned or confused message about what had happened. Geraldine had spent the entire night calling everyone we knew, spinning her version of events. I scrolled through the messages while Amy picked at her cereal, neither of us having slept well. My sister called while I was getting ready for work. She'd heard from 3 different people about the police incident, each version more dramatic than the last. I explained the actual events while applying makeup to hide the dark circles under my eyes. She listened quietly, then suggested I might want to step back from the situation. Getting too involved could affect Amy, she warned. I understood her concern, but couldn't shake the image of Stacy's terrified face. At work, I tried to focus on spreadsheets and emails, but concentration proved impossible. My coworker noticed my distraction and asked if everything was okay. I gave a vague response about family drama, not wanting to explain the whole situation. Then my boss knocked on my cubicle wall. He mentioned receiving a concerning phone call about my stability and judgment. My stomach dropped as I realized Geraldine had contacted my workplace. I spent my lunch break in the parking lot, calling the family lawyer my sister had used during her divorce. He listened to my explanation, occasionally asking clarifying questions. His assessment wasn't encouraging. As a non-guardian, I had very limited legal options. He suggested documenting everything but warned that getting too involved could backfire. The consultation fee would be $200, which I paid despite my tightening budget. Amy texted me from school that afternoon. Stacy hadn't responded to any messages since leaving our house. The silence worried her, and she asked if I could check on her friend. I stared at the message, knowing any attempt to contact Stacy could be twisted into harassment. I texted back that we needed to give them space, hating how hollow the words felt. After work, I stopped at the pharmacy to pick up Amy's allergy medication. The pharmacist, who'd known our family for years, mentioned seeing Geraldine earlier. She'd seemed agitated, talking loudly on her phone about betrayal and false friends. I kept my expression neutral, paid for the medication, and left quickly. That evening, I found Geraldine's social media posts while helping Amy with homework. Vague updates about protecting my child and knowing who your real friends are had garnered dozens of concerned comments. People who'd known us both for years were choosing sides based on her carefully crafted narrative. I closed the laptop, refusing to engage in a public battle. Amy finished her homework quietly, then asked if Stacy would be okay. I hugged her, promising that adults were working to help her friend. She nodded but didn't look convinced. The weight of the situation pressed down on both of us as we went through our evening routine. My phone rang after Amy went to bed. The caller ID showed an unknown number, but I answered anyway. Geraldine's mother's voice surprised me. She spoke quietly, admitting her daughter had problems, but insisting she couldn't get involved. Family was complicated, she said, before hanging up abruptly. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, creating a detailed timeline of events. Every text message, every incident of Geraldine leaving Stacy with us, every concerning behavior. I documented it all. The process felt like a violation of our friendship, but Stacy's safety mattered more than loyalty to someone who'd abandoned her daughter. Sleep eluded me again as I replayed the events. Had I overstepped? Could I have handled things differently? The questions circled endlessly, but I kept returning to Stacy's sewer slide attempt and Geraldine's dismissive response. No amount of second-guessing changed those facts. The next morning brought a call from CPS. They couldn't share details about their investigation, but confirmed they'd be conducting a home visit at Geraldine's house next week. The social worker's tone was professionally neutral, giving no indication of their assessment. I thanked her for the update and hung up, hoping the visit would help Stacy. Amy came downstairs looking tired and worried. She showed me her phone. Stacy had finally texted back, just 2 words. I'm scared. My heart clenched, but I reminded Amy that CPS was now involved. Professional help was coming, I assured her, though the words felt inadequate. At work, I struggled through meetings and presentations. My boss pulled me aside afterward, mentioning another phone call he'd received. This time, the caller had suggested I was unstable and shouldn't be trusted with important projects. I explained briefly about the custody situation, watching his expression shift from concern to understanding. He advised me to document any further harassment. During my lunch break, I researched Geraldine's social media more thoroughly. Her Bali vacation posts painted a disturbing picture. Nightclub selfies and party boat photos timestamped during Stacy's hospitalization. I took screenshots of everything, adding them to my growing documentation file. Amy's mood deteriorated as days passed without contact from Stacy. She picked at her dinner, mentioning that Geraldine had picked Stacy up early from school. Other students had seen Stacy crying in the car. The information made my chest tight with worry, but I reminded myself that intervening could make things worse. That night, I reached out to Mark, Geraldine's ex-husband. We'd maintained cordial contact over the years, mainly coordinating birthday parties and school events. I hesitated before calling, knowing it would anger Geraldine, but Stacy's welfare outweighed that concern. Mark agreed to meet for coffee the following evening. He arrived looking tired and concerned, admitting he'd been worried about Geraldine's parenting for years. He'd fought for custody once, but gave up when Stacy begged him not to make her mom sadder. The guilt in his voice was palpable as he described watching his daughter struggle. He shared stories I'd never heard. Geraldine leaving Stacy alone for entire weekends, forgetting to pick her up from activities, prioritizing her social life over parenting. Each revelation made my documentation seem more crucial. Mark asked for copies of everything I'd compiled, and I agreed to email them. Geraldine's harassment escalated the next day. My workplace received a formal complaint about my unstable behavior and obsession with her daughter. HR scheduled a meeting, and I spent an hour explaining the situation, providing documentation of Geraldine's dismissive texts about Stacy's sewer slide attempt. The HR representative took notes, her expression growing more concerned with each detail. To protect my job, I had to sign an agreement not to contact Geraldine directly. The restriction felt like another victory for her manipulation, but I couldn't afford to lose my income. Amy needed stability, even if it meant stepping back from helping Stacy. That evening, Amy discovered something disturbing. Through a friend's social media, she'd found Stacy's hidden account. New posts showed fresh self-harm marks on her arms, dated after she'd returned home. Amy cried as she showed me the images, begging me to do something. I held her, feeling helpless and furious. I called CPS again, reporting the new information. The social worker thanked me but reminded me that their investigation process took time. Bureaucracy moved slowly while Stacy suffered. I hung up feeling more frustrated than ever. Geraldine announced on social media that she was transferring Stacy to online school for her mental health. The decision effectively isolated Stacy from her peers and support system. Even worse, the online school was in another district, preventing any chance encounters between our daughters. Amy's grades began slipping as the stress affected her concentration. Her teachers sent concerned emails about missing assignments and lack of participation. I met with her guidance counselor, explaining the situation as diplomatically as possible. The counselor promised to provide extra support, but noted that both girls were struggling academically. The school informed me that Geraldine had removed me as Stacy's emergency contact. Years of being the backup parent erased with a single form. The secretary apologized, saying her hands were tied. I thanked her and left, another door closing on my ability to help. Mark filed for emergency custody, using my documentation as supporting evidence. He warned me that Geraldine would retaliate, but we both agreed Stacy's safety was worth any consequences. Within hours, his prediction proved accurate. Geraldine called everyone we knew, claiming Mark and I were conspiring against her. She painted a picture of a vindictive ex-husband and a jealous friend working together to steal her daughter. Some people believed her, others remained skeptical, but the damage to my reputation spread quickly. I forced myself to maintain a normal routine, going to work and helping Amy with homework while secretly organizing evidence. Every receipt, every text, every social media post that demonstrated Geraldine's neglect went into carefully labeled folders. Living this double life exhausted me, but I couldn't abandon Stacy. Amy accused me one evening of caring more about Stacy than her. The words stung because they held a grain of truth. I'd been so focused on documentation and legal strategies that I'd neglected my own daughter's emotional needs. I apologized, promising to do better, but the damage to our relationship was evident. Geraldine filed for a restraining order, citing continued harassment despite the HR agreement. She used my workplace documentation against me, claiming it proved my obsession. The temporary order was granted, including provisions that kept Amy and Stacy apart. My daughter lost her best friend because I tried to help. The grocery store incident happened 2 weeks later. I'd been shopping for dinner when I glimpsed Stacy near the produce section. She looked thin and hollow-eyed, her hair unwashed and clothes hanging loosely. Before I could decide whether to approach, Geraldine appeared and whisked her away, shooting me a venomous glare. Store security approached me later, saying they'd received a complaint about me following another customer. I explained briefly, paid for my groceries, and left. The encounter left me shaken. Even accidental meetings could now be weaponized against me. Mark's custody hearing date was set. He asked if I'd testify on his behalf, knowing it would mean facing criminal harassment charges from Geraldine. I struggled with the decision for days, weighing my own legal jeopardy against Stacy's need for a stable parent. Amy begged me not to get more involved, fearing what would happen to us. I decided to provide a sworn statement despite the risks. My lawyer advised against it, warning that Geraldine's harassment charges could result in jail time. But I couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent while Stacy suffered. I submitted the affidavit, documenting years of Geraldine's neglect and abandonment. Geraldine's retaliation was swift. She filed criminal charges based on the grocery store incident, claiming I'd been stalking her and Stacy. Every attempt I'd made to help became evidence of a harassment pattern. My lawyer's fees mounted as we prepared a defense, draining my savings and forcing me to dip into Amy's college fund. The stress fractured my relationship with Amy further. She withdrew, spending more time in her room and less time talking to me. Her resentment was palpable. I'd destroyed her friendship with Stacy and potentially risked our financial future. No explanation about trying to save Stacy's life seemed adequate anymore. Friends and family chose sides as the situation spiraled. Some supported my actions, understanding the impossible position I'd been in. Others felt I'd overstepped, that I should have minded my own business. The isolation grew as relationships strained under the weight of judgment and gossip. Work became a refuge from the chaos, though my performance suffered. Projects took longer to complete, and my focus wavered during important meetings. My boss remained supportive but warned that continued distractions could affect my annual review. The threat to my career added another layer of stress. Legal documents piled up on my dining room table, custody filings, harassment charges, restraining orders. Each paper represented another battle in a war where Stacy was the biggest casualty. I organized them methodically, preparing for the upcoming court date that would determine so much. Amy found me crying one evening over the legal bills. She hugged me for the first time in weeks, whispering that she was sorry for being angry. I held her tightly, apologizing for letting the situation affect our relationship. We both knew things would never be quite the same, but the moment of connection provided hope. The court date arrived with a mix of dread and relief. At least the waiting would end, and decisions would be made. I dressed carefully, choosing conservative clothing that projected stability and responsibility. Amy wished me luck before school, her expression mixing worry with resignation. The courthouse buzzed with activity as I arrived. Lawyers in expensive suits consulted with clients in hallways while families waited anxiously for their cases. I found Mark near the elevator, and we reviewed our strategy one final time. Everything depended on the judge seeing through Geraldine's manipulations. Inside the courtroom, I saw Geraldine for the first time since the grocery store. She dressed impeccably, projecting an image of concerned motherhood. Her lawyer, a sharp-looking woman with calculating eyes, reviewed notes while occasionally whispering to her client. The contrast between appearance and reality had never been starker. Store security later approached me about the incident, explaining that Geraldine had filed a complaint. I kept my explanation brief, paid for my groceries, and left quickly. The realization hit hard. Even accidental encounters could now be weaponized against me. I spent the next few days weighing Mark's request to testify at his custody hearing. Amy pleaded with me not to get more involved, her eyes filled with fear about what might happen to us. I struggled with the decision, knowing that testifying would mean facing Geraldine's criminal harassment charges head-on. After 3 sleepless nights, I made my choice. I met with my lawyer to prepare a sworn statement documenting years of Geraldine's neglect and abandonment. He warned me repeatedly about the risks: potential jail time, permanent criminal record, financial ruin from legal fees. I signed the affidavit anyway, my hands steady despite the consequences. Geraldine's response came within hours. She filed criminal harassment charges charges based on the grocery store encounter, claiming I'd been stalking her and Stacy. My lawyer called immediately, his voice tense as he explained how she'd twisted every attempt to help into evidence of a harassment pattern. The legal bills started arriving daily. Each envelope brought another invoice, court filing fees, lawyer consultations, document preparation. I drained my savings account first, then reluctantly accessed Amy's college fund. The guilt of touching her future education money ate at me, but the legal defense left no choice. Amy discovered the withdrawals when she saw a bank statement on the kitchen counter. The confrontation that followed was brutal. She accused me of ruining her future for someone else's child, her voice breaking with betrayal. I tried explaining, but she stormed to her room, slamming the door with finality. Work suffered as court dates multiplied. I missed important meetings for legal consultations, submitted projects late while organizing evidence. My boss's patience wore thin, and the annual review he'd warned about reflected my scattered performance. The reduced bonus meant even tighter finances. Friends and family divided into camps as news spread. Some understood the impossible position I'd been in, while others condemned my interference. My sister stopped returning calls after I asked to borrow money for legal fees. The isolation deepened with each lost relationship. The custody hearing arrived on a gray Tuesday morning. I dressed conservatively, choosing clothes that projected stability despite my crumbling life. Amy left for school without speaking to me, her silence more painful than any accusation. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, filled with social workers, lawyers, and court officials. Mark sat at one table with his attorney while Geraldine occupied the other, perfectly dressed and radiating false concern. I took my seat in the gallery, avoiding her poisonous glare. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair, reviewed the thick case file while everyone settled. The court clerk called the case, and both sides presented opening statements. Mark's lawyer outlined Geraldine's pattern of neglect, while her attorney painted Mark as a vindictive ex-husband conspiring with me. The guardian ad litem presented first, reading from a report about Stacy's deteriorating mental state. The clinical language couldn't mask the horror. Multiple sewer slide attempts, escalating self-harm, severe depression. Each detail felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Stacy's therapist testified via video link, explaining she couldn't appear in person due to Stacy's fragile state. She described their sessions in careful terms, noting how Stacy blamed herself for destroying her mother's friendship with me. The therapist's professional demeanor cracked slightly when discussing Stacy's expressed wish to stop being a burden to everyone. School officials testified about Stacy's academic decline and social isolation. The online school administrator confirmed she rarely logged in, missing assignments and mandatory check-ins. Geraldine's lawyer tried spinning this as evidence of Mark's interference, but the timeline clearly showed the decline began before his involvement. Ellen from CPS took the stand next, her testimony measured and factual. She detailed her home visits, Stacy's reluctance to speak freely around her mother, and concerns about Geraldine's minimization of the sewer slide attempts. Geraldine shifted in her seat, her mask of concern slipping momentarily. When my turn came to present my sworn statement, Geraldine's lawyer objected repeatedly. The judge allowed portions to be read into the record, the dismissive text about the sewer slide attempt, the social media posts from Bali during Stacy's hospitalization, the pattern of leaving Stacy for extended periods. Geraldine testified last, her performance polished but unconvincing. She blamed everyone else, me for interfering, Mark for abandoning them, Stacy for being dramatic. When asked directly about choosing to remain in Bali, she claimed I'd exaggerated the severity of the situation. The judge's expression hardened as she reviewed the evidence. She noted both parents' failures, Geraldine's neglect and Mark's previous absence. Neither had prioritized Stacy's well-being above their own interests. The courtroom fell silent as she considered her ruling. The decision came down like a hammer. The judge found both parents deficient, but recognized Stacy needed stability immediately. She ordered joint custody with Mark having primary physical custody temporarily. Geraldine would maintain weekends, contingent on completing parenting classes and therapy. More significantly, the judge mandated family therapy for all parties, including supervised sessions between Geraldine and Stacy. Any violation would result in further custody restrictions. Geraldine's face contorted with rage, but her lawyer grabbed her arm before she could speak. The restraining order between Geraldine and me was modified to allow communication through lawyers only regarding Stacy's welfare. The judge warned both of us that continued conflict would only harm Stacy further. I nodded, understanding the message clearly. Outside the courtroom, I encountered Geraldine's lawyer. She handed me papers, a plea deal for the harassment charges. Accepting meant pleading guilty to a misdemeanor, avoiding jail but carrying a permanent record. Refusing meant trial and potential imprisonment. I signed without hesitation. A criminal record seemed insignificant compared to Stacy getting help. The lawyer nodded curtly and left, her heels clicking on the marble floor. Mark caught up with me in the parking garage. He thanked me for everything, his voice thick with emotion. He promised to get Stacy the help she needed, to be the father he should have been years ago. I wished him luck and drove away, knowing our interactions would now be limited. At home, I found Amy in the kitchen, her homework spread across the table. She looked up when I entered, her expression unreadable. I sat across from her, explaining the day's outcomes. She listened without interrupting, processing everything. The bills continued arriving. Lawyer fees, court costs, plea deal fines. I set up payment plans, knowing it would take years to clear the debt. My credit score plummeted as I juggled payments, but I focused on keeping our home stable for Amy. Work remained challenging as I rebuilt my reputation. Projects came slowly, trust harder to earn after months of distraction. I accepted the setback, focusing on consistent performance and reliability. My boss noticed the improvement but remained cautious. Amy and I developed a new rhythm, careful and tentative. She attended therapy to process the trauma of losing her best friend and watching her mother's life implode. I joined her for some sessions, working to repair our damaged relationship. 6 months later, I glimpsed Stacy outside her therapist's office as I drove past. She looked healthier, her hair clean, wearing clothes that fit properly, a tentative smile as Mark held the door. The image stayed with me, a small victory in a war that had cost everyone dearly. Amy slowly began to trust me again, though our relationship bore permanent scars. She understood intellectually why I'd acted but struggled with the emotional aftermath. We worked on rebuilding, one careful conversation at a time. The criminal record affected job prospects when I eventually looked for new opportunities. Background checks flagged the harassment conviction, requiring awkward explanations. Some doors closed permanently, a lasting consequence of trying to save a child. I learned through legal channels that Stacy was improving, attending school regularly, participating in intensive therapy, living primarily with Mark. Geraldine completed her required classes but remained bitter, their relationship strained but working toward healing. The financial recovery took 3 years. Every payment toward legal debt reminded me of the cost of intervention. Amy's college fund slowly rebuilt, though never fully recovered. She understood the sacrifice, even if she couldn't fully forgive it. Looking back, I'd make the same choice despite the devastating consequences. Stacy lived. That was what mattered. The price was steep. Criminal record, damaged relationships, financial ruin, Amy's trust. But somewhere, a teenage girl was healing, learning that someone had fought for her when her own mother wouldn't.